Leaving the EU has ruined the UK. The economy is on the brink of collapse. But why did people vote for Brexit? And what have been the drastic consequences of this decision that threatens to destroy everything the British have built? This is the story of the worst decision ever made by the UK. How leaving the EU ruined the UK. The strange relationship between the United Kingdom and the European Economic Community goes back decades. In 1963 and 1967, the UK attempted to join the European Union but was vetoed by Charles de Gaulle, one of the figures responsible for building the EU. Since that day, relations between the United Kingdom and the European Union have been somewhat strained. In 1973, the UK was finally accepted. However, since 1975, the media have done their best to tarnish the EU's image and point out that it is an organization harmful to British interests. Moreover, since many local producers could not compete against local products such as Italian shoes and German cars, some citizens developed a resentment towards their neighbors. The British people began to create a monster to blame for all their problems, and governments found an excuse not to take responsibility for their own actions. Meanwhile, the media made many citizens eager to secede from the EU. This means the scenario necessary to trigger the separation between the UK and the EU did not happen overnight. On December 31, 2020, the UK's transition period to withdraw from the European Union ended. The UK's exit was overseen by two different prime ministers and posed a stance that left the UK divided. Since 1973, the UK has been a member of the Political and Economic Union of the European Union, but that changed on June 23, 2016. Despite the benefits the British people were leaving behind were too many, 17.4 million people voted to remain versus 16.1 million who refused to lose the right to European free movement, so the Brexiteers were victorious. But what led the UK to decide to leave the EU? In 2015, the Conservative Party called a referendum, a legal process by which a law or a matter of great importance is put to a popular vote. Most of the people who voted for the UK to leave the EU were seniors and farm workers, afraid of the free movement of immigrants and refugees. According to the media, immigrants cause all of the country's problems. The world's governments have led their people to believe that immigrants come to a nation to steal work, but they forget to say that there are also national citizens working in foreign countries. Immigrants play a crucial role in building a country, as they often take jobs that local citizens do not want to work in. But unfortunately, the Brexiteers sought to invisibilize the positive economic consequences that immigration brings. As a result, the general population was convinced that expatriates were evil and that Brexit was good for the economy. So it didn't take long for the British to vote in favor of the bill. On the other hand, small businesses had their own reasons to look forward to Brexit. Since they were paying excessive taxes, they wanted to save these costs and increase their profits. Another group of the population believed that leaving the EU would create jobs, and some went so far as to claim that the way the EU treated the UK was unfair. After Brexit, the situation in the UK was not improved at all. In fact, it has gotten worse. Those who voted to remain in the UK lived mainly in London, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. They understood that there was more to gain than to lose by staying in the European Union, knew that most immigrants were eager to work, and favored free trade. Unfortunately, this sector did not gather enough votes. Leaving the EU was an extremely complicated process. Former UK Prime Minister Theresa May negotiated a withdrawal agreement with the EU outlining their new relationship, but failed to get parliamentary approval. Yet things changed dramatically in July 2019 with Boris Johnson coming to power. After the Conservative Party won the majority votes during the general election on December 12, 2019, the Prime Minister got Parliament's approval to negotiate Brexit with the EU. On January 23, 2020, the Agreement Act received the legislative royal assent necessary to pass the bill into law. On January 31, 2020, the United Kingdom officially left the European Union but entered into a transition process that did not end until December 31st. After the bill was passed, Boris Johnson welcomed
This is the dawn of a new era.
However, his message of hope was soon shattered as the UK was left adrift by the passage of law that guaranteed that the most powerful would continue to rule. Due to Brexit, the UK must pay the European Union a divorce bill of approximately £34 billion by 2064. This is to meet any financial commitments made while it was a member of the EU. So technically, the UK has incurred a massive debt in exchange for losing privileges. Brexit was also a severe blow against globalization. As a consequence, Brexit was weakened by the European Union. If more countries with ultra-right parties decide to adopt the same posture as the United Kingdom, the European Union could eventually dissolve. Let's be honest, most people who voted for Brexit had no idea what the macroeconomic consequences of the deal would be, so they simply followed their intuition, did what they thought was best for their country, and based their decision on what the TV said. While I love the idea of regular citizens having the power to vote on laws, there is a reason we have a parliament. If all citizens had the right to pass a law, most countries would end up organizing public executions of criminals and immigrants, and we would be back to the Middle Ages in less than a week. Even if you put a well-meaning person in charge of the economy, that would not necessarily improve the economic situation. It takes a person who knows what they're doing. Governments need more than good intentions to keep functioning. Otherwise, you get disasters like Brexit. But sadly, not everyone knew how serious the consequences of this decision would be. After Brexit, the UK has come to the brink of a legal battle with Brussels and is on the verge of a full-blown trade war. While the economy and wages stagnate, prices rise, and the market is desperate. One of the biggest promises of the Brexit campaign was that the UK would get control of its money back. But given that there was less growth, trade, and tax revenue, this is only a great idea in theory. In practice, it has been shown that no one has benefited from leaving the EU. According to recent research, the economy is 5% smaller than it would have been if the UK had not left the EU. This represents a difference of £31 billion. In addition, the same study points out that investment is 13.7% lower, while trade in goods is down 13.6%. Another study shows that Brexit has cost the public finances £30 billion. Even the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development has said that the UK growth will be worse than any other G20 country next year, except Russia. As the economic situation worsens, the Bank of England is preparing for a recession coupled with wage inflation due to the shortage of workers caused by Brexit. According to Boris Johnson, the UK would have emerged faster from the pandemic than its neighboring countries, means that growth is now slower, yet that claim does not make much sense. COVID-19 has had disastrous consequences for the economy of the entire world. That is undeniable, but Brexit has only exacerbated the situation. Without the help of the European Union, the United Kingdom has no choice but to stand on its own 2 feet, and that never ends well. Even if the government gained more power, they have used it to increase taxes as never before since 1960. It was also believed that with Brexit, the UK would be free of the restrictive bureaucracy of EU funds. But these funds were used to boost growth and create jobs in the most undeserved areas of the UK. But unfortunately, the UK has not been able to live up to the task of pulling its people forward. The UK's Shared Prosperity Fund is worth 30 to 45% less than EU funds and has many more strings attached, so it has brought more problems than it has solved. To make matters worse, the sterling has plummeted to historic lows against the dollar. Between government mismanagement and macroeconomic consequences, the UK is in a critical situation that the government does not want to acknowledge. This shows that Brexit has not only failed to solve any problems, but has aggravated the existing ones. Another of the big promises the government had made was that the UK would be able to control its borders. They claimed this would stop illegal immigration so things could change for the better. However, Brexit had little effect on people choosing to cross the channel to immigrate to the UK. Some refugees have even pointed out that the UK no longer being part of the EU makes it a more attractive destination because they cannot be sent back to the other European countries. In other words, Brexit has not only not had the desired effect, but also caused the exact opposite. As people's freedom of movement has ceased, more migrants have attempted to cross the border and reach the country via small boats that risk sinking. Last year alone, more than 28,500 people crossed from France to England in small boats, surpassing 3 times the illegal immigration figures of 2020. Let's now talk about how freedom of movement has affected UK citizens. As you may know, EU freedom of movement allows a citizen of one country to seek employment in another EU country. By quitting the EU, the UK has given up this incredible benefit, but those who have been hurt the most have been average citizens. It is not as if Boris needed permission to move to Germany. Leaving the EU means that UK citizens have lost the right to live and work in another country freely, so they will have to join the long lines of people waiting to be accepted at the airport. If the UK situation worsens, many Britons will share the same fate as illegal immigrants and leave the border on unstable rafts. The effects of Brexit have been so significant that they have affected the music industry. Even rock star Mick Jagger says it has been a nightmare to organize music tours because of the growing bureaucracy. For London Mayor Sadiq Khan and Michael O'Leary, CEO of Irish airline Ryanair, Brexit has also caused chaos at UK airports because the government has been too strict on immigration rules. Airport and airline workers from the EU cannot return to work. However, the Brexit campaign did more than just say that the economy would improve and claim that immigration was the cause of all of UK's problems. It also promised that the region would become a scientific superpower. In 2020, some of Britain's brightest minds feared being cut off from access to Horizon Europe, the EU's €95.5 billion funding program for researchers. Yet Boris said the EU trade deal provided certainty for scientists so they could continue their work on large collective projects. Unfortunately, the UK's membership has not yet been ratified, so there is a chance that British researchers will never see that money again. This huge setback for British scientific development could cause the sector to stagnate and put other regional powers one step ahead. It seems inconsistent for the UK to declare its exit from the European Union and demand access to the EU members-only program. However, it is proof that not even the political class knew what it meant to leave an international political and economic association. During the campaign, Boris claimed that the UK was sending £350 million a week to the EU and said they were wasting money that could be redirected to the National Health Service. Given that the British place so much value on the NHS, this was one of the reasons the Brexiteers successfully won more sympathizers. But where is the £350 million that Boris Johnson had promised? The £350 million was a gross figure, not a net figure. The actual amount was £250 million. This slight difference of £100 million is too big a number not to have intentionally omitted. It turns out that Boris's $350 million was a complete lie. That's what Dominic Cummings, director of the Brexit campaign, confessed. According to Dominic, they would never have won if they hadn't talked about the £350 million in their campaign. The figure is false because it does not include the rebate negotiated by Margaret Thatcher that was deducted from the UK's membership fee before it was paid to the EU. Secondly, it neglects to mention that much of the money was used to improve the UK's quality of life across various sectors of the economy. For example, the Common Agriculture Policy and regional investments seek to help disadvantaged areas. In other words, it would be impossible to allocate all the quota money to a single industry to match the financial support provided by the EU. That is why, after 2 years of the agreement, it is unclear to most people what the UK has saved by avoiding paying the EU membership, as much of the money that was supposed to go to the NHS never reached its destination. Sadly, this has not been the worst lie that the government has told us. The number of new nurses coming from overseas dropped dramatically. Although the Health Secretary, Sadiq Javid, claims that the NHS gets the money, the government's recent tax hikes to fund the NHS prove the opposite. As a result, the UK now has a poorer health service that needs to be supported by more taxes. But as the UK's health worsens, the farmers share a fate worse than we had imagined. Before Brexit, farmers were supported by the EU. Now that the UK is a free and independent country, those farmers are under the protection of their government. The problem is that the government may not have them as a priority. While all were celebrating Brexit, the food in the countryside started to rot due to a lack of pickers. Labor shortages, one-sided trade agreements, and slow implementation of changes in financial support have left farmers in misery. To understand this, we need to analyze how the field works. As you may know, many crops are seasonal. Therefore, seasonal workers are hired to harvest crops at the right time of the year. That's why being part of the EU was a significant advantage. But Brexit has meant that the Poles and Romans who used to do this work cannot enter the country because of bureaucracy. Meanwhile, Ukrainians, who also used to help in the task, find themselves fighting a bloody war against Russia. Even the British fishing industry has suffered the harsh consequences of leaving the European Union and now wonder why they voted to leave. UK fishermen were one of the most vocal supporters of Brexit, yet they were fobbed off with the promise that, for the first time since 1973, the United Kingdom would become an independent coastal state with complete control of its waters. But what did they gain in return? A report by the National Federation of Fishermen's Organization revealed that most of the UK fishing fleet was set to make a loss of £64 million a year and a total loss of close to £300 million by 2026. Brexit brought new financial difficulties and increased bureaucracy. As a result, many fishermen have had to sell their boats. But while most industries are facing historic losses, trade with the EU has also been stagnant. A new study suggests that UK exports to the EU fell by 15.6% due to trade frictions. The Federation of Small Businesses has said that 1 in 8 small exporters have temporarily or permanently halted sales in the EU, while 1 in 10 is seriously thinking about it. Despite being one of the most isolationist moves undertaken in history, Brexit has managed to sell itself as an attempt for the UK to become a more global region. However, all the evidence points to the fact that the country is moving in the opposite direction. Since leaving the European Union, the UK has lost the support of major regional countries. As a result, it is having trouble finding skilled labor. The healthcare system has deteriorated, and illegal immigration has increased dramatically. With an economy on the verge of collapse, it seems clear that Brexit has not been the shrewdest decision made by the government. Unfortunately, the Brexit campaign was never intended to help the UK escape the problems besetting the region. It was nothing more than a propaganda speech to win the election, which extolled the benefits of leaving the European Union and forgot to mention that the consequences would be much worse. In other words, the UK has become the victim of a political class whose only agenda was to achieve the UK's exit. However, It takes much more to govern a country than to pass a law. 2 years have passed since Brexit, and the situation has not improved. The UK could now find itself in one of the most critical moments in its history, thanks to the misinformation and media manipulation. If the government does not do something to reverse the situation, the UK could face some of the darkest years in its history. But what do you think about Brexit? Was it a bad idea for the UK to leave the European Union? I'll be reading your comments. Thanks for watching. See you next time.